On today's episode of the Wild Party Podcast, I'm excited to welcome MeiLin Wan, the innovative founder of GenuTrace. MeiLin is a trailblazer in the world of biotechnology, having established GenuTrace as a leader in authentication solutions. Her groundbreaking work ensures the integrity and authenticity of products across various industries. With a passion for innovation and a commitment to transparency, MeiLin is transforming how businesses and consumers trust the products they use every day. In this episode, we'll explore her journey, the impact of GenuTrace, and the future of technology in safeguarding authenticity. Let's get the party started. Welcome to the Wild Party Podcast, where we celebrate the visionaries behind vegan, ethical, and sustainable business. In each episode, we'll dive deep into their journeys, uncovering the why behind their mission-driven business. I'm your host, Stefanie LaHart. Tune in with me for passionate discussions about overcoming challenges, innovative marketing strategies, and the power of using business as a force for good. So whether you're an entrepreneur seeking guidance or a conscious consumer wanting to support impactful brands, join us as we explore the stories behind the businesses that are changing the world for the better. Let's get the party started. And today on the show, I am so excited to welcome MeiLin Wan. She is the founder of GenuTrace. Now, GenuTrace is a truly unique company. They are transforming how brands think about transparency, trust, and accountability in their supply chains. And you guys know, listening to all of our other shows, this is a huge issue, especially when you're on the entrepreneur path and you have this great idea. And as you start putting it together, you really have to start thinking about, where do I get the ingredients for this incredible recipe that I want to create? That's the way I like to think of it, MeiLin. Now, for over 2 decades of experience in textiles and global sourcing, MeiLin has been at the forefront of traceability, using cutting-edge tools like DNA tracers, isotope analysis, and AI-powered systems to verify where materials truly come from. Now, in a world where sustainability claims are literally everywhere these days, and by the way, we are recording this during Earth Month, MeiLin is really helping companies move beyond the marketing and into measurable proof, protecting both the customers and the integrity of ethical business. MeiLin, welcome to the show. I have so many questions. I feel like this might need to be a couple of.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, and it's highly relevant to so many different industries, and especially to new entrepreneurs coming up with new ideas for their businesses. Traceability could be a key point of difference in the market. So happy to talk about and share my insights with all your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I have so many questions because, I just read that very pretty opening, but I don't think I understood many of the words that I even said myself. And I know our audience is going to need some explanation. But before we dive into all that, you have a really interesting story because this business, GenuTrace, is relatively new, like within the last couple of years. And prior to that, you were on the corporate track, working for someone else. But for many years, you were on the corporate track, really at a high level of VP at a company. And then you decided, you know what? I'm going to launch my own business. So, where did all of that, I think, excitement come from, that you saw something in the marketplace and said, I think I'm going to go out and do this on my own? Because, there's a certain amount of like comfort and I think just stability that comes when you're working for someone else, especially, being on the VP level. And here you are starting your own company, MeiLin. So talk us through that. What made you sit back and say, I think I'm ready to, branch out on my own and do this?
That's a really good question, and I think a lot of people at a certain point in their lives, ha come to a point where, could I do what I'm doing but better, outside of the confines of a corporate environment? And within a corporate environment, you have to follow the direction and the objective of that company, and you just don't have the freedom and the latitude to do exactly what you see as your vision. And so a big part of the decision was really A, do I still believe in providing true, genuine traceability to clients, which is essentially what I've been doing for the last 15, 20 years? And the answer was a definitive yes. And could I do it better on my own, independently, without having to necessarily follow the the norms or the rules of a corporate environment? And that was a definitive yes. So just on those 2 points, in my mind, my mind was already in in that space. And to a certain extent, when I was working in my prior company, um, I was an entrepreneur in a way, because there was no real business for traceability 20 years ago at all. So I essentially had to develop the business as we were going along, where the market was not even thinking about traceability at that point. So I have been an entrepreneur, in a way, for 20 years, but paid to be one. And now I have the experience and the knowledge and the network to implement it in the way that I feel would be to the benefit of the clients. So, yeah, that's really that in a nutshell.
I totally understand that. I think there's a secret entrepreneur in all of us that looks at maybe our day-to-day lives and thinks, "I can do that better." And sometimes that's a great idea, and sometimes you end up biting off more than you really think you can chew, and it really just becomes a process of figuring out, "How am I gonna make this work?" So when you were, in the corporate world and essentially building these systems for these other companies, this traceability, what were you seeing that was lacking that you were like, "I really think this needs to be added, and for whatever reason, it wasn't available or it couldn't be done within the structure where like, were there some glaring, I think, holes in the system that you really just thought, this has got to be a better way?
Yes, there are glaring gaps or holes in the system. The first, in any supply chain, is that the source of truth is really in the form of written documentation. And documents are necessary. They provide one form of truth and evidence, but documentation can also be manipulated. And for example, you might say this product is 100% Egyptian cotton, but how do you really know that? For if paper documents say that, is it actually true that there is 100% Egyptian cotton? And so there's a major gap there, and it still exists today. Documentation still is the norm of how people trust and in the brands and the claims and the labeling on products. But it's also changing at the moment because there's regulations in the marketplace, as well as tariffs and changes in corporate environment and in terms of governance rules. For example, in Germany, you can be held account now for greenwashing in a real way. So if you say something is eco-friendly today, that's not good enough. You actually need to back it up with actual data and evidence. So documentation on its own is not the single source of truth. You have to establish and develop a body of evidence today that demonstrates that what you are saying is in fact what you're doing. So that's one of the major gaps that I find that is in the industry today. And a second gap is that a lot of people assume that if you're being transparent, that is the truth. The transparency is basically a fancy word to say what you're willing to share with a marketplace. But that is no guarantee that the material is exactly what it is in the product, right? If you are saying that you are selling 100% extra virgin olive oil, is it extra virgin olive oil or is it some other kind of olive oil? So there's lots of ways that claims can be made to sell and market products to consumers, and consumers really have no real way to know for certain if that product is exactly what it says it is.
Marketing side, because I know you actually came from the marketing side. That's where you started your career, which is, where I landed in my career as in marketing. And yes, as marketers, we can get very creative with, we'll call it creative revelations about the products or services, that we are pitching or promoting to the public. But you're right, it's really hard from a consumer standpoint to sit there and say, is this true? And how would I know? Because we do take labels at face value. Like you said, it says it's 100% virgin olive oil. How would I know? How would I ever be able to check that? But again, that goes back to, our systems that are in place and seeing, what their accountability level is. Unfortunately, within the market, things I feel like we're able to slide by where you say like all natural on packaging. And that doesn't mean anything. And people don't know that. So there's just a lot of misinformation out there. And I do like a certain amount of government involvement and regulation in that. I'm glad other countries like Germany are doing that. I'm really hoping perhaps sometime in the near future, the US would jump on board with more of these initiatives. So, when I was introduced to you and GenuTrace, I was like, wow, this is really needed in the marketplace. Like I said, with the other entrepreneurs we've spoken to, they genuinely start their services or their brands or their products from a place of good. And then they start figuring out, well, I want to use this ingredient, but how do I know it's a good ingredient from a good place doing good things for good people, right? And I always like to use that example, when coconut milk came on the market years ago, it got so popular. And then people started finding out how that coconut milk was farmed, not only depleting the environment, but actually using slave monkey labor to get the product from the trees. And people don't know that. So, when we're just talking about the ingredient side, it sounds like you're really dialed into how does that happen? So take us through the process then of what that means to find that accountability, and give that documentation to these companies. How does that work on your side?
Well, a great example is cotton, and it's a product that we all love and know. It's in our t-shirts and jeans and home bedding. And in the last 10 years, it really has gone through a lot of scrutiny, I would say, related to claims that are made, whether it's 100% organic cotton or today it's 100% regenerative cotton, and so on and so forth. And really, the issue is that if you say that this product has 100% or whatever content it is in that product, it's not good enough to just say it, but you actually have to be able to prove that for a fact. And that's really what we do at GenuTrace, which is to provide different ways or different technologies to either test the product itself, and say it really is from India or from US, and provide scientific basis and logic for that. And science is important because without having a scientific way to analyze the product, then it's really just he said, she said. The documentation might say it is, but who really knows? And today it's very easy for a consumer actually to go to a place and photograph or capture something that puts in question whether the claim that you're making is in fact true. So, for example, if you're really saying you're using US cotton, then how do you certify that it is? How do you then prove that there's no forced labor or child labor being used to harvest the cotton? So it's multifaceted risks in supply chains and opportunities as well to demonstrate that what you're doing is in fact what you're actually doing. And it seems like a simple thing to say, right? Just prove that what you're saying, what you do is what you're doing. But it's not, because there's not just one party to the transaction and to the production process. There can be 5 or 10 or 15 parties involved in from the beginning, from the cotton that is grown to when it's made into yarn and fabric and to the ultimate finished product before it ships. So, uh, my insight and learning for many years in this area of, um, can you prove it, is really related to the product itself, and not just trust the documentation that goes along with it. There needs to be more oversight and accountability related to where products come from, who's behind the products, um, both on the environmental side. Are you even using good dyes or chemistries on the finished product? Even if you can prove it really does come from Pakistan, and then it gets dyed with a finish that isn't good for the skin, that that's also not good for the end user. So there's a lot that goes into either baking a cake or making a T-shirt, or making fine wine. Um, there's multiple variables now at at the that is the responsibility of not just one party in the supply chain. It actually is the responsibility of everyone involved in the supply chain to bring that product to market.
So true, so true. I mean, you could start with like a really beautiful ingredient, like you mentioned, this organic cotton, and then it goes through this process, and perhaps the dyes or the next level of production is really what, degrades the product. And how do you really track that, as a business owner? So you have something involved in your process called isotope testing. I am super fascinated about that because that just sounds very sciencey and very geeky. So take me through that process. What does that mean to isotope test something, and how do you do it?
Well, in the case of cotton, isotopes really relate to the natural fingerprint of the fiber that is used to make the garment or the yarn or the fabric. So it goes right to the source of the material and how you prove it. And this fingerprint consists of three isotopes: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And depending on where the cotton is grown in the world, the soil, the water, the latitude, the altitude, the latitude, and other factors in the environment contribute to the unique fingerprint based on those three isotopes for the cotton fiber. So think of it as, instead of a fingerprint like on my finger, it's a fingerprint that's natural to the material itself. So if you want to know, is there Indian cotton in this T-shirt, you send the sample to GenuTrace, and we'll send it to a lab and analyze it, and then tell you, yes, it's consistent with the origin of India or not. And today, that's an important um, proof point to demonstrate, because you also, by proving that it is from a claim origin, you also want to prove that it's also not from a high risk origin, that might use forced labor or have other um, practices that are not consistent with your brand values and goals. So there is a need to have a scientific method to prove it. Now, isotopes testing and isotopes themselves have been in the environment for decades or hundreds of years. The testing itself has been used mostly, I would say, in the food industry. So, for example, I mentioned honey. If you want to know, it's Manuka honey from New Zealand versus, which is very expensive honey, versus just regular honey from California. An isotope test could tell you the difference between those two types of honey, or if there's any form of adulteration or substitution of the 100% Manuka honey compared to um, a regular honey that you just buy off the shelf in your supermarket.
That we'll call it like that chain of custody. It's like, how do people really figure out, that's what's going on? And with that said, so we do feature a lot of businesses on this podcast that are what we call in the ethical, compassionate, vegan spaces. So it's super important for them when they are using products or they're developing, some kind of brand that, perhaps they want to stay, let's say, within the vegan or ethical space. Do you specifically work with businesses like that are trying to identify to make sure that their products are like 100% vegan? And with that said, do you do any work with companies like or corporations like the Leaping Bunny that tries to certify things like that? Is that part of what also GenuTrace can offer?
We could certainly consult and help clients work with the right companies and help them assess which are the better companies to work with relative to making vegan claims. Every product and supply chain is can be quite different. So we don't make any assumptions about that. We start from a place of where the customer is at and what their goals are and what they need to do. And beyond just the claim of it being vegan, there are maybe other questions related to the product quality or authenticity that they also want to be able to talk about. So it's important for um, new entrepreneurs and people starting off in the beginning, trying to figure out what they want to claim is very important because then that can drive the different tools that we can bring to bear that can actually help you prove the claim in a more authentic and genuine way. So, that's really the first point, that you have to understand what it is that you have and what you want to prove and and not sugarcoat it, like come from a place of truth and intention, and you can't go wrong. And there are a lot of companies, for example, in the leather space that say, well, it's vegan leather, for example, but it's actually made out of like plastics. And so even the term vegan, if it's not used in the right way, can also confuse the customer. Like, what exactly am I buying? Because when you say vegan, you think it's natural and healthy and um, lots of things that relate to that and clean. But if you attach it to something else and make it appear that it is, that's the basis of greenwashing, right? That you're making something appear to be something else that it isn't. And that's really not good for anyone ultimately. And the leather industry, yes, there's been challenges and everything, but they also go through a lot of effort to do the right thing and do the transparency and show that the animals are treated humanely, etc. So, it's all about perspective and also truth.
As well. I personally don't like that the industry uses the word leather, like when they're saying vegan leather. I think that's just from the get go, it's very confusing to people. I myself, when I see it on a product, I'm like, what do you mean by vegan leather? Like, what do you consider vegan leather? That you fed the cows grass, so they're vegan. So now you think their skin is vegan? I mean, it's so crazy too. So, tell me what the process looks like to work with a company like GenuTrace. How do companies come to you? And specifically because we know that Europe seems to have a lot better, I think, rulings on, greenwashing and making sure there's a lot more transparency. So what are you seeing out in the market, maybe as far as Europe's going? So let me break this down because I just asked like five questions. All right. If I am a new company, how do I start working with GenuTrace? Like, what is the first conversations that we would have?
The first conversations we would have with a client really are to A, understand what their goals and objectives are. Sometimes it's not clear to them exactly, but we help them work through that. We'd like to understand what other forms of proof or traceability they may have as well, and work with the information they do have and build upon that. Um, if they need to prove the origin of the material, then it's very easy. We walk them through a process of how to submit the sample, what samples to submit, and then we test the sample, report it to them. If they want to be able to prove that the product comes from a farm, and then show that it's present in the yarn and the fabric all the way to the finished product, we can work with them to set up the whole system and implement the project for them. So there's just different ways that they can work depending on what their goals are. But the simplest is just to call us and we'll help you understand like what are some of the solutions that are available. Not everything has to be an isotope test either. It could be using a QR code, for example, that can help um, track the products that you have, but also organize all of your documentation in one place. And that's just a serious time saver for many companies. And a lot of small businesses don't realize setting up a system that organizes your documentation, your materials, your inventory, connects to your accounting, helps you incorporate testing if you do any testing. Um, that's really a key change that's happening, I believe, in the industry, how to be a bit more organized so that we can spend time doing the things that are important, like building relationships with our clients and visiting the mills and actually seeing what they're making, if all of those things are important. But if you don't have the time and freedom to do that, then all that good information that you're collecting on your materials um, are going to be lost, and then you won't have much of a strategic advantage over your competition.
So true. It's we get buried in paperwork on all sides. No matter the size of the business, there's just a trail of paperwork that always seems to be organized and needs attending to. But that paperwork in a lot of ways can really save us a lot of heartaches, in the future. So one of the things that you brought up before, and I wanted to touch on, was that you really help companies navigate the world of, let's say, making sure that their labor force is fairly treated, fairly paid, and ethical. And I know that you do a lot of work with the Forced Labor Protection Act. The name of it, I don't know how to say. Is it Ouija?
It's the
The
Uyghur forced labor.
Uyghur,
Yeah. And
right?
represents a group of people who've lived in a certain part of Central Asia and happens to be in China, in the region of Xinjiang. So there was a specific legislation that was passed a few years ago um, that basically identified this group of people being held um, in, forced labor conditions,
Mm.
and there was the New York Times and other publications that provided visible proof, satellite imagery, documentation, um, pretty substantive body of information, and more is coming out from lots of different independent sources that there is this issue. And the US is really the only country that has this law that basically enables Customs and Border Protection to either um, stop the goods from entering the country, destroying the goods if they do enter the country. Have basically the ability to do that. And this law also is unique because it basically presumes you're guilty and that it is your responsibility as the importer to prove your innocence.
And that's a U.S. law.
Mm.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's good.
And there's no
It's
other
nice to
country
know.
there's no other country that's given Customs and Border Protection the latitude to question goods from entering the country that may have forced labor related to it. It's really the first legislation of its kind that even identifies forced labor in supply chains. And the first products that were identified were cotton, tomatoes, and polysilicon chips. And polysilicon chips, are used in everything from your phone battery to, you know, microchips in computers. It's really solar panels. I mean, there's just a multitude of things that now have the question of, is there forced labor connection connected to it? And there are different ways to prove forced labor too, right? There are financial transactions. That's one part of it. But the other part, which is what we look at, is do the internal materials have any connection to that part of the world that may be using forced labor? And it also has ramifications for future trade agreements and what's happening on the tariff side. Because if the US says, well, if you use US cotton um, outside of the US and you make it into a t-shirt, what if you re-import that good into the US, maybe under some new legislation that they were working on, um, you might be able to get a duty exemption or tariff exemption if you were able to prove the origin of the material what is US derived. So there are opportunities to do the right thing. And also, there are new trade agreements and tariffs that could relate the origin of the raw material at its source and provide some kind of benefit. And this could relate to chocolate, it could relate to coffee, it could relate to olive oil, it could relate to any material. So if this is the way the US government is already starting to think about trade agreements and linking them to tariffs, what is every other country going to be thinking? The same.
That's so such a great, I'm gonna say, financial incentive there for people, like you said, to do good, and really to have that very long-term thinking about how potentially it could come back. Because that's a very interesting example you gave about ho growing cotton here, exporting it to create a good, and then bringing that good back here. I mean, that's such a interesting life cycle, and like you said, one that would be potentially extremely hard to trace without companies like GenuTrace. So, as all of this has started formulating in your mind when you were working at these other companies and you saw this real need, what was the next step for you to really start setting up GenuTrace? Did you, because you were already in, that field, were you able to kind of pull this, I think, the logistics together? Or what did you find in your entrepreneur journey that maybe, was a little challenging for you? Because sometimes it can seem like, well, I'm in the industry, so I should know the next step, but starting your own business is, of course, always tricky. So, for you, what was it like then to go branch out on your own and decide I'm gonna launch GenuTrace?
What my situation with GenuTrace is a little unique because I'd already been working and developing the cotton business over 20 years. So I had developed a lot in good contacts and trust within the industry, so that was important. And the other part of it is that the company that I worked with previously wanted to exit that part of the business, so I was able to acquire the cotton library and other materials from my former company and form the business myself. So I, in effect, was continuing what I was doing but under a new company and on my own independently. And what I found particularly surprising, um, and I guess it's partly a challenge that I thought was going to happen, is that I wasn't sure if the clients would be willing to go with me. That sometimes they think, oh, it's a little risky because there's a new company, etc. But so many people really did trust me and knew that I would do the and they, the big question was, if I go with you, would anything change? In terms of the quality of the service and the, you know, and attentiveness and, all those things that people want. I said there would be absolutely no change. And they said, well, then we'll stand with you. We'll go with you and support you. And that was really one of the best things about setting up the company, that knowing that other people really believed in me, more than I actually believe in myself, was so gratifying, and it made me even want to do a better job. So, I think that if you have developed good rapport and relationships with people in the industry and they trust you, that's almost half the battle. Because today it's very hard to know who to work with and who's reliable, who's consistent, um, who's going to come up with the next innovation and the better way to do things. And sometimes it's somebody who is not so tied in with the corporate world, or that somebody's truly independent. And that's really why I formed GenuTrace, to be the the independent voice for the brands and the manufacturers, and not feel that they had to even use, do you only do this technology, or do you only do that technology? And I'm like, no, we're technology agnostic, which means that we could work with any company. But what's more important is that we take care of you, and we find the right solutions to match your needs, and not the other way around. When I worked at a technology company, I was just trying to push the technology and market and sell that technology that my company was offering. But as an independent consultant now, I have a much broader um, a- array of solutions that is, it might not be suitable for this company, but it might be suitable for a different company with a different set of objectives and scenario. So that's the beauty of why I was able to, turn, I guess, a challenge into a business that I already believed in, and that if people believe in you, then I think you can say, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to give it my best shot, and I'm going to do the right thing to support the client. I think that's the number one thing. If you are not behind the client, you don't support them, and they know it, and they just won't go with you.
It's so true, and having that vote of confidence from the people you're already working with, that they believed in you and knew that you could take this next step and really expand what you were doing, a better, bigger offering for more companies. That just goes to show you what a need there is in this industry for solutions like this. And I imagine, coming from a marketing background like you did, I think telling the story of what you do is maybe a little bit easier, because it's a complicated subject. Like, even when I was reading, the literature and the bio and the business, it really like took me a couple of reads to be like, well, what does this mean? Why would I care as a consumer? Why would I care as a business? And, with that said, are you really seeing in the marketplace that consumers are caring more about what, let's just say, the life cycle of a product and a supply chain is? Do you feel like their questions or their maybe interest in certain topics like this is driving the marketplace more? Considering now that we have the internet, everybody is their own scientist and their own researcher, sometimes to the detriment of themselves. But do you feel like it is consumer demand now that's driving it for companies to say, you know what, we need to have better solutions and better tracing about what is really going into our products?
There's a lot in that question. And I think the consumer is sometimes right and not always right. In marketing, we're always drilled to believe the customer is always right. But what they don't say is that the customer doesn't know what they don't know. They don't teach you that in marketing 101. And so I would say that, and on the one hand, consumers have a lot of power with what they purchase. They can turn a one small thing into a big viral issue, and all of a sudden you've lost your business. Um, and it could be anything. And so the companies, what it says to me as a brand and a company is that you got to be careful about how you communicate and what you communicate, and it should be backed up with evidence and things that you can support, and not try to greenwash or sugarcoat it to the consumer. Because the minute the consumer feels there's some inauthentic thing that doesn't feel right about your company or brand, they can seriously do a lot of damage. And there's not much you can do about it once it's out there in the marketplace. And so that's what makes marketing so much more dynamic, but also challenging today for many marketers and people in sales. Because gone are the days where you can just say, oh, these are the most sustainable denim jeans ever on the planet. I can tell you at least 10 countries will not accept that anymore.
We were using these very superlative adjectives. It's the best ever. It's like the best ever to who? So I do think it's good that consumers are asking questions and sure, do all your research. But again, viral isn't always a good thing, and especially when things start to really pop off, especially on social media, it's like people, please take some time to take a breath because I assure you it's probably not what you think. There's not some major conspiracy in any industry. In fact, there's one thing going on right now that I'm not even going to say because I don't want to give it any more breath. And I think you know which one it's out there. But we'll talk about that offline. But I have to say, I have learned so much just from talking to you now. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for you and GenuTrace. This has been really eye opening for me. And I'm really happy that we were able to, have this conversation and make people aware that, this solution is available. So tell us, where can people find you online and how can they get in touch with you?
Uh, you can visit us at genutrace.com. And we have a LinkedIn following. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well. Um, we also write a lot of articles, and we do podcasts like yours. And it's really about how can we make supply chains and brands um, really shine and shine in the right way. And it's really about proof at the end of the day, because, as we say, if you claim it, can you prove it? That's really our motto. And it doesn't matter who you are in the supply chain, what product you're selling, that principle holds no matter what.
I love it. In fact, I feel a T-shirt coming on in the future that just says, "Can you prove it? GenuTrace."
That's right.
Yeah, feel free to make that with your 100% virgin cotton as well. So, thank you so much, MeiLin, for being on the show. It's been so much fun talking to you, and I can't wait again to see what the future holds for you and GenuTrace. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Wow Party podcast. If you're an entrepreneur or professional who would like to be on this podcast, please visit boomtownmarketing.com and click on podcast. We believe that every business has the potential to change the world for good, and we want to support our community to help make the world more ethical, compassionate, and sustainable for all future generations to come. And if you're looking to build your business, no matter what level you're at now, request your free marketing consultation at boomtownmarketing.com and click Get Started.